The words cut sharper than crystal. "Someone let the staff in," Miranda Vale said, her smile wide enough to draw blood. The laughter came fast. Bright, expensive, hollow. It ricocheted off marble and gold, filling the starlight grand ballroom like champagne gone sour. Ilara Voss didn't flinch. She stood in the middle of it all, tall, composed, in a dress too simple for the room, and a calm too dangerous to name. Her eyes held nothing. Not anger, not shame, just stillness. A waiter froze mid-step. A bow tie twisted. The quartet's strings faltered. The sound of glass against glass stretched too long, then stopped entirely. Miranda's voice carried again, lighter this time, teasing, almost playful. "Come on, darling. Fetch us a drink, will you?" Something in the air cracked. Not a sound, something else. Ilara raised her phone. "Thumb steady. Freeze all transactions," she said softly. No one laughed after that. Today, we're not watching a woman humiliated. We're witnessing the moment power changed its shape, quietly, beautifully, irreversibly. They didn't just mock her. They erased her name. Right before she rewrote theirs. In a city built on contracts and confidence, a single quiet woman brought an empire to its knees, without raising her voice. They called her arrogant, audacious, impossible, until the moment she picked up her phone and canceled $1 billion with one breath. Today, we're not here to watch revenge. We're here to understand control, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that waits, the kind that changes everything. If you believe some stories don't need explosions to be powerful, stay with us, because this one begins in silence and ends with a storm. The chandeliers did not glow. They watched. Gold light pooled across a sea of glass, tuxedos, and practiced laughter. A quartet murmured in the corner, the melody too elegant to belong to anyone in particular. Waiters moved like polished chess pieces. Names here had weight. Names here opened doors. Ilara Voss arrived without one. A silk gray dress skimmed her frame, simple enough to be mistaken for restraint, precise enough to be mistaken for defiance. No diamonds, no crest, no family insignia stitched into a cuff. The only metal on her was the thin edge of a phone she held loosely at her side. She paused under the central chandelier and let the room choose a story for her. It obliged. Heads tipped, smiles curved. The distance between curiosity and contempt is not measured in feet. It is measured in the speed of a glance turning downward. The first voice wore pearls. "Who let the service staff onto the floor?" Miranda Vale did not need to raise her volume. The room lifted it for her. "Someone, please escort the help to the kitchen." A ripple of amused consent. A man in a midnight tuxedo snapped his fingers toward Ilara as if summoning a refill that had arrived uninvited in the shape of a woman. Another guest, careful with his vowels, added something about standards. The quartet kept playing. Music is excellent at pretending not to hear. Ilara did not flinch. She looked instead at the chandelier as if reading a clock only she could see, then raised the phone to her ear. Her voice was low, no more than a thread. "Freeze all transactions." The string section missed a heartbeat. Someone laughed to cover it too late. Ilara's throat did not tighten, her shoulders did not rise. The call was not a shield. It was a lever. Miranda glided forward, pearls knocking softly against one another like small arguments. "My dear, this floor is for people with capital at risk. You are in the wrong room in the wrong dress." Ilara considered the remark, not the speaker. The less a woman is expected to speak in a room like this, the more dangerous her silence becomes. A young reporter near the bar caught the first hint of static in the air and pivoted her lens. Her name was Cass Mercer. She'd talked her way into a press pass that said logistics. Logistics, she thought, sometimes means listening better than anyone else. The pass on Ilara's wrist, ivory paper, elegant script, was the kind given out at the door to the kind of guests who don't need them. Miranda reached, took it, examined it for a performance only the front tables could see. Counterfeit, she decided. She tore it cleanly in two. Paper sounded louder than crystal. Some insults bruise. Some organize. Ilara did not look at the torn halves. She watched Miranda's fingers, steady, practiced, certain they were recording a minor victory. Two waiters passed in opposite directions. One looked away. The other didn't. The one who didn't was young and learning how to watch a room without being noticed by it. He saw what the others did not. Alara had moved half a step closer to the center of the floor, a distance so small it could be called nothing. And yet nothing is how you reshape a map, 1 inch at a time. The security captain at the archway glanced toward Miranda out of habit. She inclined her head an old signal. He took a breath, then another. Policy prefers not to think, but the body often does. He approached. Ms. He left the name open, a wire suspended over uncertainty. Ilara's gaze met his and did not ask for mercy. You'll want to wait. He hesitated, which is a kind of intelligence. Miranda disliked intelligence in uniforms. Now please. Cass adjusted the focus on her phone. The light off the chandelier haloed Ilara's profile in a way a headline would remember. She whispered into her recorder anyway. A habit from print. Calm subject. Volatile room. Ma'am, the captain tried again. The word doing more work than he asked of it. If I could see, you just did, Ilara said. Not unkind, not amused. She returned the phone to her ear. Hold positions. No settlement approvals, no wire confirmations, no exceptions. A pause, as if listening to a second sky. Yes, I'll say when. Miranda's smile narrowed to a blade. She's pretending. It's adorable. She turned to the nearest cluster of donors, the kind who speak in foundations and legacies. These events attract ambition. It's practically philanthropy. The donors laughed because generosity is easier in groups. Across the floor, someone murmured a surname that sounded like Voss, and then shook his head, deciding against it. Recognition is often a door we refuse to open because of what it might let in. Ilara studied Miranda the way one studies a portrait. Brushstrokes, not eyes. The pearls were old, heirloom old. The confidence was older. Confidence like that forgets to check the exits. Would you like me to walk her out? The captain asked Miranda, his voice acquiring the bureaucratic shape of a solution. Ilara answered first. You could. Or you could wait 30 seconds and spare yourself a very tedious apology. The suggestion was not a threat, and so it felt heavier. The quartet reached a phrase that wanted to lift. It faltered. The violist blinked, counting silently. Cass heard the hesitation land in the bow and knew she would keep this exact second on her timeline. Miranda lifted her hand to dismiss the moment as one brushes lint from a lapel. Escort her, she repeated, and reached for another glass from the tower, the practiced ease of entitlement turning the stem between two satisfied fingers. The young waiter, the one who knew how to look, caught Ilara's eye by accident and found himself unable to misname what he saw there. It wasn't anger. It was calibration. Ilara lifted the phone one last time. Confirm receipt of the freeze. Route authorizations to me only. We're done letting other people sign my name. The sentence did not make sense to the room, which is why the room quieted to hear more of it. The captain did not move. Neither did Ilara. Stillness can be a method. Miranda took her sip, then set the glass down a little too quickly. Crystal answered. She smiled brighter. Brightness is a common disguise for nerves. Cass framed both women in a single shot and felt the story turn under her feet, like a tide changing its mind. A story doesn't announce that it's about to become a different kind of story. It simply begins behaving as if it already has. The first alert chimed from a phone near the donor's table. Then a second, then a third, rising like small birds startled from a hedge. Faces dipped. Brows folded. Someone said, "That can't be right," which is what we say when it already is. Ilara didn't look at the screens. She looked at the chandelier again, as if checking the second hand. The room saw a woman trying not to be removed. The room hadn't yet realized it was being held in place. The captain stepped back half a pace, a gesture with the dignity of a decision. Miranda saw it and mistook retreat for weakness. She turned to the crowd, offered a fresh smile, and pointed toward Ilara as if conducting a lesson. The quartet found its melody again, but not its authority. No one here knew what had begun. They only knew they were already inside it. The ripple began without permission. Phones buzzed, notifications stacking like falling dominoes. A hush rolled through the hall. Not silence, but the kind of heavy stillness that carries its own sound. Laughter died the way candles die in wind. Quick, reluctant, disbelieving, Ilara Voss remained still. Her posture was almost modest, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. That nothingness frightened people more than rage ever could. Miranda Vale glanced toward her assistant, a man in a white pocket square who had never once failed to understand her signals. He didn't move. His eyes were locked on his phone, color draining from his cheeks. "What is it?" she hissed. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The screen in his hand showed a single line of text. Vale Corp Holdings temporarily suspended pending verification of primary authorizations. That line did not belong to fiction. It belonged to control. Ilara lowered her phone. "The freeze is active." Her voice was quiet, measured, but it traveled. "Please continue your event." No one did. Cass Mercer, the young reporter, adjusted her camera, her breath loud in her own recording. The framing caught everything. Miranda's pearls, the chandelier's fractured reflections, and Ilara's face. Calm. Almost tender in its composure. The quartet tried again to play. But their strings had lost their confidence. Notes wavered like a lie rehearsed too many times. "You can't possibly," Miranda began, but her sentence had nowhere to go. She gestured toward the guard. "And this." The captain didn't move. He had seen the look in Ilara's eyes, the unflinching certainty that belongs only to people who have already counted the cost. He straightened his jacket instead. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "perhaps we should verify her credentials before—" "Credentials?" Miranda's laugh cracked. "She's a fraud! Look at her!" Cass's camera caught the laugh. It was too sharp, too loud, too late. Ilara took a slow breath, then stepped forward into the light. Her heels sounded deliberate, every click a quiet rebuttal. "You've already torn my credentials," she said, her tone soft as if explaining arithmetic. "You can't verify what you destroyed." The words hung there, neither threat nor plea. Behind Miranda, whispers began threading the room, half questions, half defense mechanisms. A man in a silver waistcoat leaned toward another guest. "Did she say Voss? As in Voss Capital?" The other man shook his head. "Impossible. Voss runs offshore, not here." "Maybe she doesn't have to run offshore anymore," a woman murmured. Miranda turned toward them, desperate to reclaim the narrative. "You're all being ridiculous. She's an actress." Ilara's gaze met hers, steady, impassive. "No, I'm an accountant." The understatement landed like a verdict. Cass whispered into her mic. "She's not bluffing." Miranda's assistant finally found his voice. "Madam, our accounts, they're not refreshing." Miranda froze. The chandelier's light dimmed slightly, as if even the electricity knew it should lower its tone. Ilara adjusted the sleeve of her dress, the gesture as casual as brushing dust from marble. "You can check your messages," she offered. "Or you can wait. Either way, the result will be the same." Cass caught the line. It sounded scripted only because truth often does. Miranda's breath came shallow. "You think you can humiliate me?" "No," Ilara said. "You've handled that yourself." The waiter, the same young man who hadn't looked away earlier, set down his tray and stood a little taller. It wasn't rebellion, just recognition. Around them, people shifted. Shoulders angled. Feet turned. The air felt charged with a realization too large to name. Ilara didn't move again. She didn't need to. Power doesn't announce itself. It alters gravity. Miranda's pearls trembled against her collarbone. The sound was small but unmistakable. "This is absurd. Who do you think you are?" Ilara's lips curved faintly. "Someone you should have recognized before you tore the paper." Cass blinked hard to keep her shot steady. The entire ballroom had turned toward the center, to the woman they had laughed at only minutes ago. "You're making a scene," Miranda said weakly. "No," Ilara replied. "I'm finishing one," Cass whispered. She said it like a closing statement. The security captain stepped back completely now, eyes fixed on Miranda's trembling glass. The hierarchy of the room had inverted without ceremony. Miranda tried one last defense: volume. "This is madness. I'll have your name blacklisted from every—" "Then spell it correctly," Ilara interrupted. The phrase hit the room like a gust. A pause followed, the kind that feels longer than it lasts. Cass's phone vibrated, a push notification. Her eyes widened. "Breaking news! Voss Global suspends all Vale Corp partnerships effective immediately." She looked up. It's already public. Every screen in the ballroom glowed in unison. Miranda's phone rang. The assistants did too, and then the PR directors. The guard didn't have to ask permission anymore. He simply stepped aside. Ilara turned slightly toward the exit, the silk of her dress catching the gold light. The room that had dismissed her now parted instinctively, unsure if it was out of fear or respect. She stopped once, halfway to the door, and looked back at Miranda Vale, pale, silent, pearls like tiny accusations around her neck. "Next time," Ilara said softly, "look at the person before you look at their past." She didn't wait for an answer. The chandelier flickered as she left, the light settling into something truer, less forgiving, and in the echo of her footsteps, the ballroom understood the cost of not recognizing its own undoing, because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who doesn't need to stay. Outside the ballroom, the night had teeth. Rain pressed against the glass veranda like static, each drop a pulse of relief for those who needed the world to keep moving after humiliation. Inside, the noise had thinned to whispers and the faint crackle of broken protocol. Ilara Voss didn't rush. She crossed the marble hallway at the same measured pace that had carried her through the ballroom. No security followed. They wouldn't. Not anymore. Rebecca Thorne was waiting, sleek suit, tablet in hand, her expression a controlled storm. "It's done," she said softly. "Vale Corp's access revoked across all channels. Treasury confirms the freeze." Ilara nodded, her eyes distant. "The room? Still pretending it understands what happened?" Ilara's lips tightened. "Let them have the illusion. It's all that's left." The two women walked toward the elevators. Their heels echoed off the marble, synchronized like a metronome marking the end of one empire and the beginning of another. In the ballroom, Miranda Vale tried to compose herself. The crowd's attention, once her weapon, had become her audience. Her assistant hovered uselessly nearby, eyes glued to the phone. The notifications were relentless. Suspension, freeze, withdrawal. Cass Mercer, still recording from a discreet angle, whispered to her microphone, "The investors are panicking. Miranda Vale hasn't made a statement. The guests are leaving in silence." Miranda grabbed a half-empty glass, her hand trembling. "This isn't possible," she muttered. "One woman can't—" The sentence refused to finish itself. At the edge of the room, the young waiter from earlier stood near the service door, watching. He didn't understand the mechanics of finance, but he understood posture. The woman they'd mocked hadn't flinched once. That was enough. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and replayed the clip he'd quietly recorded. Ilara's calm voice. "We're done letting other people sign my name." It sounded less like business and more like a verdict. Outside, Ilara's car waited, a black sedan, understated, the kind of anonymity that costs more than display. Rebecca opened the door, but Ilara paused before stepping in. "How long before the statement goes live?" 10 minutes, Rebecca replied. "I scheduled the drop across every financial wire. Make it 8. Rebecca adjusted the tablet, the screen reflecting the rain. "Understood." Ilara turned her gaze back toward the ballroom entrance. Through the glass, she could see flashes of light, phones still recording. A few reporters chasing clarity, investors clutching at air. "They won't understand yet," Rebecca said quietly. "They don't need to," Ilara answered. "Understanding comes after loss." The elevator chimed behind them. 2 guests stumbled out, whispering furiously about shares, reputation, crisis. They didn't recognize her. Not yet. Rebecca gave a small, satisfied exhale. "It's poetic," she said. "They called you invisible. Now you're the only name on their screens." Ilara's expression softened, just slightly. "That's not poetry," That's accounting. The sedan door shut behind them, sealing out the remnants of the ballroom's noise. Inside, the city lights bled into one another, gold, gray, and rain-slicked silver. Rebecca's voice broke the rhythm. Do you ever regret doing it this way? Ilara didn't answer immediately. She watched the reflection of the chandelier fading in the rear window, the ghost of power misused. Regret? She murmured. No, but it's a quiet victory. The kind that doesn't taste sweet. Rebecca looked up from her screen. They'll come after you for this. They already did, Ilara said. Tonight was the second attempt. The first was when they laughed. The car rolled through the city's arterial roads. Each red light felt deliberate, each green a permission slip to proceed with inevitability. Rebecca tapped her screen. The press release is ready. Headline reads, Voss Global terminates Vailcorp partnerships, citing breach of conduct. Send it. Rebecca hit the command. The sound of the digital ping was quiet, but final. Ilara leaned her head back, closing her eyes. The rhythm of the rain merged with the hum of the engine. In another part of the city, Miranda Vale's boardroom would soon light up like a fire alarm. Phones would ring, portfolios would freeze, journalists would camp outside glass towers waiting for statements that wouldn't come. Ilara opened her eyes again, voice barely above a whisper. When arrogance is public, justice should be too. Rebecca didn't reply. She knew better than to disturb a thought that clean. Outside, a billboard flickered with Vailcorp's logo, bright, defiant, unaware it had already been orphaned. The sedan passed beneath it. Ilara glanced up once. Pull it, she said. Rebecca smiled faintly. Already did. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The car glided through the wet streets, leaving the ballroom and its ghosts behind. The hum of the city rose again, unconcerned. Infinite, Ilara finally murmured almost to herself. They thought silence was weakness. She looked at the city's skyline. Its towers reflected on the rain-specked glass. They were wrong. The Vailcorp Tower was still awake when the first news alerts broke. Inside its glass walls, the night staff had stopped pretending to work. Screens blinked red across the trading floor. Error codes, system locks, access denied. A secretary clutched her phone, her reflection trembling in the monitor's glow. At the far end of the top floor, Miranda Vale stood before the panoramic window, a crystal glass in hand, untouched. Her assistant spoke quietly behind her. They're saying all active accounts were frozen within 90 seconds. No leaks, no warning. 90 seconds, Miranda repeated. That's impossible. He hesitated. They're quoting her name. Voss Global initiated it. Miranda turned slowly. Ilara Voss, she said, tasting each syllable as though it were an accusation. She was nobody. A ghost. The assistant didn't answer. He'd already seen the numbers. Ghosts didn't move markets. On the other side of the city, Ilara's sedan glided to a stop in front of a modest, unmarked building. The kind no one photographs, but everyone obeys. Inside, the lights were low, the air thick with quiet certainty. Rebecca led the way into the conference room. A single wall of screens displayed cascading updates. Vailcorp stock suspended, pending inquiries. Shareholder statements under review. Regulatory alerts. Rebecca set her tablet on the table. It's moving faster than projected. Ilara glanced at the screens. Fear usually does. She crossed to the window, watching the reflection of the city's tallest towers flicker in the rain. What about the Harrow Group? They're ready. They've been waiting for you to pull the trigger. Ilara's tone flattened. Of course they have, Rebecca hesitated. You're sure you want to go that far? It's already enough to end her career. Ilara turned, her face unreadable. This isn't about her career. It's about precedent. Rebecca nodded, understanding what the word meant in Ilara's language. Precedent was a polite synonym for justice. Meanwhile, back at Vailcorp, Miranda's boardroom had erupted. Dozens of executives talking over one another. A chorus of panic disguised as expertise. We can reverse the freeze, one said. She can't have that much control, said another. She does, murmured the CFO, staring at his phone. Our joint fund registry lists her as the majority underwriter. The words cut the room open. Miranda slammed her glass onto the table. That's not possible. We vetted every investor. The CFO shook his head. We vetted every name she allowed us to see. The realization landed like a sentence being read aloud. Miranda felt her stomach twist. She hid behind subsidiaries. That's fraud, not if she owns them. The silence that followed was heavy enough to bend the air. Cass Mercer's phone buzzed again. She was still in her car outside the ballroom, typing fast under the dim glow of the dashboard. Her editor's voice crackled through the speaker. You're telling me she was the Alara Voss? As in, yes, Cass said. And she just sank Vale Corp live mid-event. The editor whistled. You have footage? I have everything. Upload it. Right now, Cass hesitated. Should we? There's no official statement yet, her editor laughed dryly. There doesn't need to be. That was the statement. Cass ended the call, her pulse quickening. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she could still see the ballroom lights dimming one by one. Inside the control room, Rebecca's phone vibrated. Breaking coverage on 4 major networks, she said. They're replaying your call. Alara didn't look away from the window. Let them, Rebecca lowered her voice. You know what happens next? Yes, Alara said. Miranda will call. She'll beg. She'll negotiate first. Then beg, Rebecca exhaled. And if she apologizes? Alara's eyes met hers, cool and unwavering. I'm not in the forgiveness business. The screens flickered. News anchors talking over grainy ballroom footage. Captions scrolling. Power shift at Vale Corp Gala. Unknown woman halts billion-dollar deal. Alara Voss, mystery or mastermind? Rebecca turned up the volume. The studio analyst's voice trembled with awe. In all my years covering corporate strategy, I've never seen a move like this. It's surgical, precise, and personal. Alara allowed herself the smallest smile. They're learning to tell the difference. Back at Vale Corp, Miranda stared at her reflection in the darkened glass. Her pearls no longer glowed. They just hung heavy, like relics from a better story. Get her on the line, she whispered. Her assistant nodded, dialing quickly. At that same moment, in her control room across the city, Alara's phone began to vibrate. She didn't look surprised. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Are you going to answer? Alara reached for the phone, let it ring once more, then pressed ignore. Not yet, she said. Let her feel the silence first. The rain outside thickened, drumming steady against the window. Rebecca folded her arms, watching her. You always knew this would end here, Alara nodded. It didn't end here, Rebecca. It started when they thought I'd stay quiet. The phone stopped ringing. The city kept breathing. Justice rarely announces itself with noise. Sometimes it just waits for the sound of a call that won't be answered. The morning after the gala, the city woke uneasy. Financial tickers bled red across every screen. Analysts stumbled through live segments trying to sound composed. Words like collapse, suspension, and breach of conduct repeated until they lost meaning. The stock exchange floor looked like aftermath, men in navy suits muttering into phones that no longer answered. In her penthouse office, Miranda Vale sat without makeup for the first time in years. The glass desk reflected the mess she couldn't control, papers scattered, the faint vibration of a dozen unread messages. She'd barely slept. She'd watched her empire shrink to headlines, watched Alara's name replace her own. Her assistant entered quietly. Board wants a statement by noon. Miranda didn't look up. What am I supposed to say? That I was outmaneuvered by a ghost? He shifted uneasily. They're calling for damage control. Public apology. Maybe partnership renewal if she allows? Miranda's head snapped up. If she allows? He nodded. Voss Global holds over 40% of our pending assets. Without her, there is no Vale Corp as it exists. Miranda exhaled slowly. Then it doesn't exist. Across town, the headquarters of Voss Global glowed under the pale morning light. There were no marble floors here, no chandeliers, just glass, steel, and precision. Inside, Alara Voss stood before a long table surrounded by her legal and strategy team. Rebecca Thorne was beside her, crisp as ever, scrolling through fresh reports. Vale Corp's valuation dropped another 8% overnight, Rebecca said. Investors are jumping ship faster than expected. Ilara's response was quiet. Pain always accelerates after denial. A strategist leaned forward. The media's calling it poetic justice. You're trending as the silent CEO. It's sympathetic, but unpredictable. Ilara tilted her head. Sympathy is a distraction. What matters is message, Rebecca nodded. We've drafted a values statement for press distribution. Neutral tone, emphasizes accountability, not revenge. Good, Ilara said. We're not vindictive. We're disciplined. The team dispersed, leaving only the two women. For the first time since the ballroom, Rebecca allowed herself a small laugh. You know they're terrified of you now. They should be terrified of themselves, Ilara replied. I didn't destroy their integrity. I just revealed its expiration date. Rebecca's phone chimed, a call request from Vale Corp. It's her, she said. Ilara didn't move. Let her wait. Rebecca frowned. She's desperate. If you don't take this, she'll still be desperate tomorrow. Rebecca sighed. Sometimes I forget how patient you can be. Ilara's gaze drifted toward the skyline. Patience isn't virtue, Rebecca. It's timing. At Vale Corp, Miranda's boardroom had turned mutinous. Half the directors demanded a public plea. The others wanted to sue. None wanted to admit they'd ignored Ilara's warnings years earlier. Miranda finally rose from her seat. Enough, she said. No lawsuits, no pity. She won't destroy me in public. She already has, the CFO murmured. Miranda's hand slammed against the table. Then we make it private again. Her assistant cleared his throat. You mean negotiation? No, Miranda said coldly. Redemption. But redemption, like debt, accrues interest she couldn't pay. By mid-afternoon, the footage from Cass Mercer's recording had gone viral. The clip, 37 seconds long, showed Ilara's calm, her command, her final line, "We're done letting other people sign my name." Comment sections exploded with disbelief, admiration, rage. Some called it revolution, others revenge. But across every opinion, one truth resonated: silence could be power. Cass sat in her newsroom, headphones on, rewatching the footage for the 10th time. Her editor leaned over. This story's got legs. Everyone's asking, who really is Ilara Voss? Cass paused the video at the frame where Ilara's face caught the chandelier light. Someone who never needed to explain. In another window, Vale Corp's apology statement draft blinked on a laptop screen. PR handlers debated tone. Regretful but strong, contrite but confident. None of it mattered. By evening, the story had outgrown the company. In her office, Ilara opened a single envelope delivered by hand. Thick paper, gold seal. The letterhead read Vale Corp Board of Directors. She unfolded it without hurry. To Ms. Voss, we request an urgent private meeting to discuss restitution and renewal of joint ventures. She smiled faintly, setting the letter down. Restitution? She repeated, tasting the irony. Rebecca appeared in the doorway. The Vale letter? Ilara nodded. Predictable. What do you want to do with it? Shred it, Ilara said simply. Rebecca crossed the room, placed it in the shredder slot, and pressed the button. The soft hum filled the silence as paper turned to threads. Ilara watched without emotion. They built their empire on assumption. I built mine on memory. One lasts longer. Rebecca studied her. Do you ever feel sorry for them? Ilara looked up. Sorry implies surprise. I'm not surprised. The city outside hummed, its noise returning like a pulse after a pause. The balance of power had shifted quietly, invisibly, but permanently. Ilara leaned back in her chair. Justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives dressed in restraint. Rebecca smiled. And leaves wearing silence. Ilara's eyes met hers. Exactly. The night was settling again, calm and deliberate. Somewhere in another tower, Miranda Vale would still be drafting statements, still believing she could reclaim what was already gone. And somewhere between regret and realization, the world had learned the price of underestimating the quietest woman in the room. The city's pulse quickened by morning. News vans lined the plaza outside Vale Corp's headquarters, cameras waiting for a glimpse of contrition. Anchors rehearsed their sympathy while checking stock tickers on their phones. The world loved a fall, especially one wrapped in pearls. Inside the tower, Miranda Vale faced her reflection again. The lights were too bright, the air too still. Her team had drafted 5 different versions of a public apology, but none made it through her edit. Words could not reverse a loss that had already gone digital. Her assistant hovered nearby, voice cautious. "If you don't release something soon, the market will assume guilt." Miranda laughed softly, a brittle sound. The market already decided. "They don't need my confession." He lowered his gaze. "They're calling her the architect of your collapse." "Then she built faster than I did," Miranda said. The door opened. Cass Mercer stepped inside, camera in hand, credentials visible. "Ms. Vale, I'm Cass Mercer with Global Business Daily. I was at the gala last night." Miranda stiffened. "I remember. You were the one filming?" "Yes, and I'm not here for a quote. I'm here for context." Miranda considered her, then gestured to the chair opposite. "Context," she repeated. "You want to know how it feels to be undone by silence?" Cass set her camera on the table, recording light blinking red. "I want to know why you laughed." The question sliced clean. Miranda's lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, the room's hum swallowed everything. Finally, she said, "Because I thought she was one of us trying to be something else. I didn't realize she was something none of us could touch." Cass leaned forward. "And what is that?" "Prepared," Miranda whispered. In another part of the city, Ilara Voss stood on a rooftop terrace, the morning sun sharp against the glass horizon. Rebecca joined her, a cup of coffee in hand. "They're asking for a meeting again," Rebecca said. "Same request." "Private setting," Ilara didn't turn. "What's their tone?" "Less arrogance." "More prayer," Ilara smiled faintly. "Then we're getting close." Rebecca sipped her coffee. "You're enjoying this?" "No," Ilara said. "I'm documenting it." Rebecca glanced at her. "For what?" "For when they try to rewrite it later." Down below, the traffic flowed like a bloodstream, indifferent to victory or defeat. Ilara watched it in silence, her expression unreadable. Rebecca's phone vibrated again, this time a message from Cass Mercer. "The reporter sent you something," she said, passing it over. Ilara opened the file. It was the uncut recording from the gala, raw and unfiltered. Every insult, every silence, every flicker of realization. She watched it all again. The room's laughter and her own stillness. Rebecca waited. "You're not going to release it, are you?" "No," Ilara said softly. It already released itself. Meanwhile, in Vale Corp's boardroom, Miranda ended her interview with Cass, her composure fragile but intact. Cass packed her camera, pausing at the door. "You know," she said quietly, "people don't hate you. They just don't trust you anymore." Miranda looked up. "Trust is overrated. Fear works faster." Cass gave a small nod. "But it doesn't last." She left without waiting for a reply. Miranda stood pacing toward the window. Outside, she could see the reflection of another tower, sleek, silver, unmarked. Voss Global. For the first time, she felt something heavier than anger. It wasn't defeat. It was recognition. She turned to her assistant. "Book a flight. Geneva. We'll regroup offshore." "Already done," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. Miranda exhaled. "Cancel the press conference." He blinked. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said. "There's nothing left to defend." Back on the terrace, Ilara's phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. She let it ring once, twice, before answering. "Ms. Voss," Miranda's voice said, small but deliberate. "We should talk." Ilara didn't respond immediately. She let the rain of silence stretch across the line. "I know what you've done," Miranda continued. "You've made your point." Ilara's tone was calm. "No, Miranda, I clarified it. You'll ruin both of us." "There's no us," Ilara said. "There never was." Miranda's breath caught. "You think this is justice?" "No," Ilara replied. "Justice is neutral. This is memory." And with that, she ended the call. Rebecca studied her. "You didn't even let her finish." "She finished years ago. She just didn't notice." The wind shifted, tugging lightly at the hem of Ilara's gray silk dress. Below them, the city moved on, as cities do, forgetting faces but never forgetting stories. Rebecca placed her cup down, her voice low. You know they'll make you the villain in their version. Ilara smiled. Then they'll finally be right about something. Rebecca watched her for a moment longer, then said quietly, Phase 3? Ilara nodded. Let's make it public. The sound of her words carried over the terrace, into the hum of the awakening city, a declaration disguised as calm. And somewhere in that sound, the world began to understand Ilara Voss wasn't rebuilding an empire. She was rewriting the definition of power. Rain fell again that evening, slow and deliberate, like the sky was erasing the traces of last night's humiliation. At Valecorp Tower, the marble lobby echoed with footsteps that didn't belong there anymore. A new security team stood at the entrance, unfamiliar faces replacing the old ones who'd quietly resigned before dawn. On the 42nd floor, Miranda Vale's once impenetrable office was a war room. Screens flickered with damage reports. Emails streamed in from investors demanding clarity she couldn't give. A lawyer leaned over her desk, voice careful. The board will force your resignation if the numbers don't stabilize within 24 hours. Miranda didn't look up. And then what? Then they'll beg Voss Global to acquire what's left. The lawyer hesitated, lowering his voice further. Frankly, they already have. Her hand froze over the pen she hadn't used in hours. She's not interested in owning us. She wants to bury us. He didn't argue. There was nothing left to defend. Outside the window, the skyline pulsed with light, indifferent to collapse. Miranda turned away from it and walked toward a framed photograph on her shelf, herself standing beside her late father, the company's founder. His smile was frozen in a decade that no longer mattered. Do you know what he used to say? She asked quietly. He said there's no such thing as a clean victory. There's only survival. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Then I hope he was right. At the same time, across the city, in a quieter district lined with steel and silence, Ilara Voss entered a private conference room. Rebecca Thorne followed, carrying a folder marked simply Phase 3. The walls here were matte black, the lighting soft but sharp, designed for decisions, not comfort. 3 men waited inside, executives from Harrow Group, Valecorp's oldest competitor. Ms. Voss, one of them greeted, rising halfway. We finalized our proposal, a full acquisition of Valecorp's foreign subsidiaries. We'll need your clearance for integration. Ilara sat, folding her hands on the table. And their workforce? We'll retain 80%. The rest are redundancies. No, Ilara said. You'll retain all of them. The man blinked. That's not... It is, Ilara interrupted. Those employees built the value you're purchasing. If we remove them, we inherit their resentment. And I don't buy resentment. Rebecca almost smiled. It was the kind of correction that rewrote business etiquette in a single breath. The executives exchanged glances. Understood, one murmured. Ilara leaned back. Good. Then let's talk numbers. Rebecca slid a document across the table, a condensed acquisition plan, each figure surgical in precision. The Harrow men read in silence, the sound of flipping pages louder than conversation. Finally, one of them spoke. This effectively isolates Valecorp from every major supplier. That's the point, Ilara said. You don't win wars by taking their land. You win by cutting their lines. Outside, the rain drummed harder, as if underscoring her words. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She checked it quickly and murmured, Miranda's PR team just leaked a memo claiming this was all a misunderstanding. They're blaming a technical error. Ilara's tone didn't shift. People always call justice an error when it arrives early. She signed the last page of the contract and handed it back. Effective immediately. Make the announcement within the hour. The Harrow executive hesitated. Would you like to give a statement? Ilara looked out the window, her reflection merging with the storm. I already did. They didn't ask what she meant. They didn't need to. Across town, Cass Mercer was in the newsroom again, reviewing the new headline breaking across every major outlet. Harrow Group acquires Valecorp assets under Voss Global oversight. She leaned back in her chair, whispering to no one in particular. She's not just cleaning up a company. She's cleansing an industry, her editor glanced over. And Miranda Vale? Cass exhaled. She's learning that humiliation has an echo. At that very moment, Miranda's office door opened again, her assistant holding a tablet, eyes wide. They've announced it. Miranda didn't ask what it was. She already knew. The tablet screen glowed between them. The headline looked surgical in its simplicity. She set the tablet down carefully like handling an urn. "Get me Ilara Voss on the line," she said, her voice stripped of arrogance. Her assistant hesitated. "She doesn't take calls." "Then we go to her." He blinked. Now, Miranda said, "before the world forgets who we were." She straightened her jacket, gathered her composure like armor, and walked out of the office she'd built and lost in the same breath. Outside, the rain didn't let up. It fell harder, relentless, indifferent. Somewhere beyond that storm, Ilara Voss was already 2 steps ahead, signing her name to a deal that made her not just the victor, but the architect of a new order. And somewhere deep inside Miranda Vale's resolve, a strange truth began to take root. Sometimes the only way to understand power is to be crushed by it. The drive to Voss Global headquarters was quiet. Miranda Vale sat in the back of her black sedan, her reflection blurred against the rain-streaked window. She'd spent a lifetime being announced, at galas, at summits, on magazine covers. But tonight, no one would announce her. She was arriving as an uninvited guest to the woman who had taken everything. Her assistant checked his phone nervously. "They're expecting us," Miranda smiled faintly. "I doubt that." The car stopped beneath the overhang of a minimalist glass building. No golden emblems, no nameplate, just 3 words etched discreetly into steel: Voss Global Headquarters. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of restraint, gray marble, soft light, silence that demanded honesty. A receptionist looked up from her desk, her voice calm. "Ms. Voss is in conference." "She doesn't take walk-ins." Miranda stepped closer, her tone brittle. "Tell her Miranda Vale is here." The receptionist's hands paused over the keyboard. Then, without expression, she said, "Please wait." Minutes passed. A door at the far end opened. Rebecca Thorne appeared, tablet in hand, posture like a gatekeeper who had already read the ending. "Ms. Vale," she said evenly. "Ms. Voss didn't schedule you." "I'm aware," Miranda replied. "That's why I'm here." Rebecca studied her for a moment, then nodded toward the hallway. 5 minutes. Miranda followed her through corridors of glass and shadow. Every step felt like walking deeper into judgment. When they entered the conference room, Ilara Voss was standing by the window, her silhouette framed against the city's glimmering sprawl. She didn't turn around. "You came." "I had to," Miranda said. "You left me no choice." Ilara's reflection flickered faintly on the glass. "You had 1,000 choices. You just never believed any would have consequences." Miranda's voice cracked. "You've made your point." "I didn't make it," Ilara said, finally turning. "You wrote it. I just read it aloud." The air between them thickened with memory. The ballroom, the laughter, the sound of torn paper. Miranda took a breath. "You've destroyed a legacy." Ilara stepped closer. "You mistook inheritance for legacy. They're not the same." Miranda's eyes burned. "You think this makes you better?" "No," Ilara said quietly. "It makes me necessary." Rebecca, standing in the corner, kept silent. She'd seen Ilara in hundreds of negotiations, but never like this, calm, deliberate, dangerous in stillness. Miranda's hand trembled as she reached into her bag, pulling out a document. "A settlement, you win. Publicly, legally, financially. But I keep what's left of Vale Corp. My family's name?" Ilara didn't reach for the papers. "Names are just containers. It's the content that defines them." "You can't own everything," Miranda said sharply. Ilara's eyes didn't waver. "I don't want to. I just refuse to rent my dignity to anyone else." Silence filled the room. The rain outside had slowed, tapping lightly against the glass like punctuation. Finally, Miranda spoke again, softer. "I underestimated you." "No," Ilara said. "You misread me." Miranda looked down, her composure unraveling. "You could have humiliated me publicly. You could have destroyed me in the press. I didn't need to, Ilara replied. You did it to yourself the moment you decided who didn't belong. Miranda looked up, eyes wet but fierce. What happens now? Ilara regarded her for a long moment before answering. You rebuild, quietly, or you vanish. The choice is yours. Just don't mistake my silence for forgiveness. Miranda's voice dropped to a whisper. Is that what this was? Revenge? Ilara's tone softened. No, Miranda. This was balance, Rebecca stepped forward. Time's up. Miranda gathered her papers but didn't move. You've won, Ilara. Completely. Ilara looked back toward the skyline. Winning isn't the point. The point is that next time someone tells a woman she doesn't belong in the room, she'll have a precedent. Miranda lingered for one last heartbeat, then turned to leave. Her heels echoed down the corridor, fading into the architecture of consequence. Rebecca closed the door behind her. For a moment, neither woman spoke. The storm outside had eased, leaving the city slick and reflective. Finally, Rebecca said, You didn't need to see her. I did, Ilara murmured. Some debts require witnesses, Rebecca tilted her head. Do you feel any different? Ilara's gaze stayed on the horizon. No, but I suspect she does. Rebecca smiled faintly. And what's next? Ilara turned back toward her desk, the soft glow of the monitors painting her in silver light. We begin the audit, Rebecca's brow furrowed. Of what? Ilara's eyes hardened. Of the rest of them. As she spoke, the first alerts appeared on her screen. Companies linked to Vale Corp, boards that had looked the other way. It was beginning again, not out of vengeance, but calibration. Outside, the last of the rain slipped down the glass, tracing invisible lines between old power and new order. And somewhere in the echo of that storm, the city began to whisper a new truth. Silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The headlines called it the Quiet Reckoning. By the second morning, every major network had shifted focus from the collapse of Vale Corp to the rise of Voss Global. Analysts tried to explain how a single order, spoken in less than 10 words, could dismantle a billion-dollar empire. None of them understood that it wasn't the words, it was who said them. Ilara Voss had not given interviews. She hadn't posted statements, nor had she appeared on camera since the gala. But her silence had become its own form of communication, measured, unbroken, impossible to ignore. In a cramped newsroom on the east side of the city, Cass Mercer watched the latest panel discussion unfold. Experts argued about leverage and risk. Cass listened for truth and found none. She turned to her editor. They keep talking about money. This was never about money. The editor adjusted his glasses. Then what was it? Cass leaned back. Recognition. Power is just the shape respect takes when people finally see you. He nodded slowly. You're writing the long piece? Yes, Cass said. And this time, it's not about Vale Corp. It's about her. Across town, Ilara stood in the glass atrium of her headquarters. The city sprawled beneath her, indifferent, obedient. Rebecca Thorne approached, holding a digital tablet glowing with alerts. We've received requests from 5 major boards asking for consultation on ethics compliance, she said. You're becoming the industry's conscience. Ilara's lips curved faintly. They don't want conscience. They want cover. Rebecca smiled. Still, it means they're afraid to ignore you now. They should be afraid of themselves, Ilara said quietly. Power isn't inherited, it's audited. Rebecca paused. And what happens when they start auditing you? Ilara's eyes flickered toward the skyline. Then I've done my job too well. The room fell into a comfortable silence. The kind that exists between people who understand that purpose doesn't always feel like peace. Meanwhile, at the ruins of Vale Corp's old headquarters, movers packed boxes in silence. The company's logo had already been removed from the front wall, leaving a pale outline where its pride used to be. Miranda Vale watched from the balcony above, her reflection faint against the empty glass. Her assistant approached cautiously. The transfer orders are complete, she nodded. And the employees? They'll be absorbed by Harrow Group, all contracts rewritten under Voss Global oversight. Miranda closed her eyes briefly. So even in the ashes, her name is there? Yes, he said softly. Everywhere. Miranda turned away. Good, let it remind them. He hesitated. Remind them of what? She looked at him with a calm he hadn't seen in days. That I lost to someone worth losing to. It was not admiration. It was acceptance, which is rarer. Back at Voss Global, Rebecca joined Ilara in the main conference room. Press wants a quote, she said. Something about what this means for women in leadership. Ilara exhaled. If I give them a headline, they'll make it a slogan. Slogans fade. Rebecca nodded. Then what do I tell them? Tell them justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive. Rebecca smiled. That's still a headline. Ilara gave a small shrug. Then let it be one worth remembering. Later that evening, Ilara walked alone through the quiet corridors of her building. Each step echoed softly, the sound of ownership stripped of vanity. She passed portraits of her company's early projects, renewable energy initiatives, education foundations, technology ventures that redefined access. Each image reminded her that victory wasn't new. It was just finally visible. She stopped at the end of the hallway where a single plaque was mounted on the wall. It read, "Integrity is the longest game." Ilara reached out and touched the engraved letters. Her reflection merged with the words. For a fleeting moment, the world outside the glass felt almost still. Rebecca found her there minutes later. You're staying late again. I like it when the building's quiet, Ilara said. It's always quiet now, Rebecca replied. You made it that way? Ilara smiled faintly. No, the noise just learned how to listen. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, brief, silent, breathtaking. The city glowed in its aftermath. Cass Mercer's article published that same night. The headline was stark, unembellished. The woman who ended the gala. The first line read, In a world obsessed with voices, she proved silence was a language, and everyone heard it. By dawn, Cass Mercer's article had spread across the world. Screens in coffee shops and office lobbies displayed the same image. Ilara Voss standing beneath the chandelier, phone to her ear, eyes unwavering. The caption beneath it read, Power doesn't announce itself. It acts. The internet called her the architect. Some said she was ruthless. Others called her revolutionary. But the truth, as always, was quieter than the noise. At a small apartment overlooking the river, a young woman named Nia, one of the servers from that night, watched the interview replay on her cracked phone. She had seen it all unfold, the insult, the silence, the reversal. Her mother called from the next room. You're watching her again? Nia smiled faintly. She didn't just stand up for herself. She stood up for every time we couldn't. Her mother appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of tea. And look what it cost her, Nia shook her head. No, look what it bought. Down the street, Cass Mercer stood outside a TV studio, phone buzzing nonstop. Producers wanted her opinion. Anchors wanted her insight. She'd become the unexpected voice of the story she'd only meant to capture. But Cass knew she wasn't the center. She was the witness, and witnesses carry responsibility. Her producer's voice crackled through the earpiece. We need you live in 20. Can you make it? Cass exhaled, watching the sunrise stain the skyline gold. I'll be there. But I'm not doing a takedown. I'm telling the truth. Meanwhile, inside Voss Global, the morning meeting began in precise silence. The executive board sat around the oval table, their expressions equal parts awe and caution. Rebecca opened the session. Revenue projections up 14% in 48 hours. Partner inquiries up 21%. Media coverage remains volatile but favorable. Ilara nodded once, her gaze steady. Volatility is good. It means they're paying attention. A board member leaned forward. We've been approached by 3 major governments asking for consultation on corporate reform. They want your model. Ilara looked at him. They don't want reform. They want insurance. He hesitated. And what do we give them? Options, Ilara said. And consequences. Rebecca glanced down the table, watching how even the most seasoned executives deferred when Ilara spoke. There was no bravado, no performance, just gravity. As the meeting adjourned, Rebecca lingered. You know what they're calling you online? Ilara smiled slightly. Something poetic, I assume. The woman who dismantled an empire with a whisper. Ilara considered it. Then they still haven't learned. It wasn't a whisper. It was a decision. Later that afternoon, Cass appeared at Voss Global for a scheduled interview. Rebecca escorted her through the mirrored corridors. She doesn't usually speak on record, Rebecca warned. Cass smiled. Neither did I. Until now. They entered Ilara's office. The view stretched endlessly, the city glinting beneath a sky that looked newly scrubbed clean. Ilara stood by the window, not turning immediately. Ms. Voss, Cass said softly. Thank you for seeing me. Ilara faced her. You've already seen me. Everyone has, Cass nodded. But no one's heard you. Ilara's eyes narrowed, not in irritation but curiosity. And what do you think I'd say? Cass lifted her recorder. That's why I'm here. A pause stretched between them, filled with the hum of distant traffic and the faint buzz of power that never quite leaves a room like this. Ilara gestured toward a chair. Then sit. But if you want answers, you'll need better questions. Cass smiled. Fair enough, she began carefully. When you ended the deal, did you know it would destroy them? No, Ilara said. I knew it would reveal them. Cass leaned in. And what did you see? Ilara's expression was almost tender. People who believed politeness could disguise cruelty. Cass hesitated, then asked, Was it personal? Ilara shook her head. Everything is personal when you're told you don't belong. Cass looked down at her notes. You understand people will call this revenge. They already have, Ilara said. But revenge ends things. I began something, Cass exhaled. Something like justice? Ilara's tone softened. Justice is balance. I just tipped the scale back to level. Rebecca, standing quietly near the door, felt a flicker of something between admiration and unease. The calm in Ilara's voice wasn't vengeance, it was precision. Cass turned off her recorder. That's all I need. Ilara raised a brow. You'll write what you want anyway. Cass smiled faintly. Probably. But I'll write it truthfully. She stood to leave. At the door, she paused. Do you ever miss who you were before that night? Ilara's answer came without hesitation. I didn't lose her. I introduced her. Cass nodded once and left. When the door closed, Rebecca spoke quietly. You just handed her another headline. Ilara turned toward the window again. Let them write. Stories are temporary. The shift isn't. Outside, the city's pulse quickened again. New rumors, new deals, new fears, and somewhere, in a quiet apartment overlooking the river, a young woman pressed replay on her phone. Watching that single moment, the silence, the stillness, the reversal, she whispered to herself. That's what power looks like when it remembers where it came from. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in newsrooms, in boardrooms, in whispered conversations over polished dinners. They no longer called it a scandal. It had become a correction. The night Ilara Voss stood silent under a chandelier was now a parable taught in universities, dissected in podcasts, quoted in leadership seminars. Yet beneath all the analysis, no one seemed to ask the question that mattered most. What happens to the woman after she wins? That question followed Ilara everywhere. Weeks later, she found herself at a private summit in Lisbon, surrounded by leaders who spoke in numbers instead of truths. The ballroom here was smaller, simpler, but the scent of privilege was the same. Cameras flashed, glasses clinked, and conversations spun like silk threads meant to strangle. Miranda Vale was there too. Her presence drew murmurs, half shock, half intrigue. She had resurfaced quietly, reinvented as a strategic advisor for an emerging tech syndicate. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Two women, once locked in silent war, now breathing the same air again. Ilara noticed her before anyone else did. Miranda stood near the far wall, her once proud posture tempered by something humbler, age, reflection, or maybe just exhaustion. Their eyes met across the room. The crowd blurred away. Rebecca leaned close to Ilara. You don't owe her anything. I know, Ilara said. That's why I might speak to her. When the dinner ended and the noise receded into murmurs, Ilara approached. Miranda turned before she reached her. "I wondered if you'd come," Miranda said softly. "You knew I would," Ilara replied. "History doesn't like loose ends." For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the victor and the lesson, standing in the same dim light. Miranda broke the silence first. "You dismantled me completely, but I kept thinking about that night. About the way you didn't shout." Ilara tilted her head. "Noise is easy. Consequence takes patience." Miranda gave a small, tired laugh. "And yet here we are, same room. Different gravity? You think this is gravity?" Ilara asked. "No, Miranda. This is aftermath." Miranda's gaze flicked toward the guests, still lingering nearby, pretending not to watch. "They love you now. The woman who burned the system and made it look elegant." "They don't love me," Ilara said. "They fear becoming the next me." Miranda nodded, her eyes glistening, not from tears but from understanding. "That's the cost of power. You stop being human. You start being a mirror." Ilara studied her. "And what do you see in yours?" "A woman who mistook cruelty for control," Miranda said quietly. "And another who taught her that silence isn't weakness." For the first time in years, Ilara almost smiled. Not from triumph, but from something closer to peace. A waiter passed by offering champagne. Miranda took one flute. Ilara didn't. "Still no toast?" Miranda asked. "I don't drink to endings," Ilara said. "Only beginnings." They stood there a moment longer, two silhouettes bound by memory and consequence. When Miranda finally turned to leave, she paused. "You know, there's a story going around," she said. "That you planned all of it, that you knew exactly how I'd react." Ilara's voice was almost a whisper. "I didn't plan it. I just stopped apologizing." Miranda nodded once, then disappeared into the crowd. Rebecca approached a moment later. "Was that closure?" "No," Ilara said, her gaze following Miranda's retreating form. "It was recognition." Outside, the Lisbon night buzzed with distant music and the hum of electric cars along the narrow streets. Ilara stepped out onto the balcony, the Atlantic wind cool against her face. She looked down at the city glowing like an old memory being rewritten in light. Rebecca joined her, resting her elbows on the railing. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd stayed silent that night?" Ilara's tone was calm. "I did stay silent. The world just decided to listen." Rebecca exhaled, a faint smile playing at her lips. "And what now?" "Now," Ilara said, "we make sure silence keeps its power." She turned away from the ocean, back toward the summit, toward the whispers, the stares, the weight of influence that had become her shadow, because power wasn't about speaking louder. It was about deciding when silence meant surrender, and when it meant command. And somewhere deep in that quiet room between regret and reverence, Miranda Vale's words still echoed, proof that even fallen empires leave behind a kind of worship. The next morning, Lisbon was draped in mist, soft, almost forgiving. From her hotel balcony, Ilara watched the city wake beneath a pale sun. Fishermen moved along the docks. A church bell tolled somewhere beyond the fog. For the first time in weeks, her phone was silent. Rebecca entered quietly, carrying 2 coffees. The summit was a success. 3 governments just asked for your framework on ethical restructuring." Ilara didn't turn. "Ethical restructuring," she repeated. "They mean self-preservation," Rebecca smiled faintly. "And yet they'll still pay for your advice." "They're not paying for advice," Ilara said. "They're buying reflection." Rebecca studied her a moment. "You don't sound proud." "I'm not sure pride belongs here anymore," Ilara said. "It was useful once. Like anger. But they're both too loud for what comes next." Rebecca set the coffees down. "And what does come next?" Ilara turned from the balcony, eyes clear, voice deliberate. "Quiet reform. The kind that doesn't trend." Before Rebecca could answer, the television in the corner flickered on. A news anchor was reporting the latest corporate fallout, another conglomerate collapsing under public pressure. A familiar headline scrolled beneath it. "Voss Global Model Forces Global Accountability." Rebecca picked up the remote, lowering the volume. "They've turned you into an adjective," Ilara smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure it means something." Across the city, Cass Mercer packed her camera gear into a worn leather case. The Lisbon assignment was over, but the story wasn't. She replayed her interview with Alara, the words looping like an echo she couldn't silence. Justice is balance. I just tipped the scale back to level. Her editor had called that line the quote of the decade. Cass disagreed. It was a warning disguised as grace. She opened her laptop, typing a new headline draft, When Silence Leads. In another part of the city, Miranda Vale sat alone at a cafe facing the water. No assistants, no cameras, no bodyguards. The waiter didn't recognize her, which was both mercy and punishment. She traced the rim of her coffee cup with one finger, watching the reflection of sunlight ripple in the liquid. Across from her sat a journalist she'd once refused to speak to. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked softly. Miranda looked up. "All of it. And none of it." He leaned forward. "Would you have done things differently if you knew who she was that night?" She smiled sadly. "Knowing her name wouldn't have changed who I was." He paused, recording every word. "You've become part of her story now." "No," Miranda said, her tone quiet but firm. "She became part of mine. The difference is, hers is still being written." That afternoon, Alara visited an orphanage her foundation had quietly funded years before the gala. The building was modest, tucked away from the city's noise. Children ran through the courtyard, their laughter clean and defiant. A young girl, maybe 10, stopped and stared at her. "You're the lady from the phone," the girl said. Alara smiled. "What phone?" "The one who didn't yell when they were mean," the girl said. "Mama said you spoke like thunder hiding behind glass." Alara crouched to meet her eyes. "Thunder only matters if it brings the rain." The girl grinned and ran off, leaving Alara staring after her, at innocence that didn't yet understand power, but already recognized dignity. Rebecca appeared beside her, watching quietly. "You know," she said, "that moment in the ballroom, it's mythology now. Everyone has their own version." Alara exhaled softly. "Let them." "The story isn't mine anymore. It belongs to whoever needs it." Rebecca tilted her head. "And what do you need, Alara?" Alara looked out over the courtyard. "To remember why I started. Before the headlines. Before the noise." Rebecca nodded slowly. "You've changed things. For now," Alara said. "Change only lasts if it becomes culture." They walked together down the hallway lined with children's drawings. One caught Ilara's eye, a sketch of a tall woman in a gray dress, standing in a room full of people who looked away. Above it, written in a child's uneven hand, "She didn't leave." "They did." Alara touched the drawing gently, her expression unreadable. "It's strange," she murmured. "How something can be both victory and memory at once." Rebecca smiled. "You taught them that silence has power. Maybe that's enough." "Maybe," Alara said quietly. "Or maybe it's just the beginning." That night, as the city lights shimmered across the river, Alara stood on the terrace again, alone, but not lonely. She watched her reflection merge with the skyline, the hum of the world blending with the calm inside her. Below, the sea murmured its endless rhythm, a reminder that justice, like the tide, always returns. And for the first time since the ballroom, Alara Voss allowed herself to breathe without defense. Because some storms don't end. They simply learn to rest. The city moved on. But the echo of that night never truly faded. It lingered, in headlines, in whispers, in the quiet recalibration of power. By the time autumn came, the story of Alara Voss had outgrown her. Universities taught it. Corporations feared it. Activists quoted it. And yet, Alara herself had vanished from the public eye. No appearances. No interviews, only rumors. Some said she was consulting for governments under another name. Others claimed she'd bought an island to live in solitude. But those who knew her best, Rebecca Thorne, Cass Mercer, understood. Alara hadn't disappeared. She'd simply stepped back to watch the world react to her reflection. On a gray October morning, Cass arrived at Voss Global headquarters one last time. The building felt different now, quieter, older, like an empire learning how to breathe. Rebecca greeted her in the lobby, warmth behind her measured professionalism. "She's expecting you," Rebecca said. "But not for an interview. She just asked to see you." Cass nodded, unsure what to expect. "It's been months." Rebecca smiled faintly. Time behaves differently around her. They walked through the familiar glass corridor. Cass still remembered that first visit, the tension, the weight of unsaid things. Now the air felt lighter, but not softer. Controlled calm, like a storm's eye, Ilara stood by the same window where she'd once faced Miranda Vale, but she looked changed, less armor, more stillness. She wore a dark linen suit, her hair tied back, no jewelry, no symbols of dominance. "Just presence." "Cass," she said, her voice even but warm. "You've been busy," Cass shrugged. "Stories don't stop." "No," Ilara said. "But some of them stop being yours." Cass smiled faintly. "You mean yours?" Ilara gestured for her to sit. "I read your book," Cass blinked. "You did?" Ilara nodded. The title was bold, Cass laughed softly. "The Quiet Architect." "I was going for subtle." "It wasn't subtle," Ilara said, "but it was true." They sat in silence for a moment, the city humming below. Cass studied her face, tired but unbroken. "So why now? Why call me after all this time?" Ilara looked out the window. "Because stories evolve. And if mine keeps being told, I want the ending to serve someone else." Cass leaned forward. "You're stepping away." Ilara's gaze stayed on the skyline. "Not stepping away, redirecting." "To what?" "To the places they don't film. The rooms without chandeliers. The tables no one's invited to." Cass nodded slowly. "You're building something." "Rebuilding," Ilara corrected. "This time without an audience." Cass hesitated. "And Miranda Vale?" Ilara's expression didn't change. "She called last week." "What did she want?" "To thank me," Ilara said simply. "And to warn me," Cass frowned. "About what?" Ilara turned to face her fully now, her tone calm but sharp. "That every revolution breeds another mirror image. Someone who will do to me what I did to her." Cass sat back, absorbing the weight of it. "And do you believe that?" Ilara smiled faintly. "Of course. Power always loops back. That's how we know it's real." The room fell quiet again. Cass found herself unsure whether she was speaking to a woman or a concept, a person or a precedent. Finally, Ilara said, "I'm not afraid of being replaced. I'm afraid of being misunderstood." Cass nodded. "Then say what you want remembered." Ilara stood, walking toward the window, her reflection merging with the skyline once more. "That I didn't cancel a deal. I corrected a hierarchy," Cass exhaled. "And that hierarchy keeps rebuilding itself. Then we keep correcting," Ilara said softly, "until silence doesn't need to be an act of defiance anymore." Rebecca appeared at the doorway, tablet in hand. "The board's waiting." Ilara nodded, then looked back at Cass. "Stay for the meeting if you'd like." "No cameras. Just observation," Cass smiled. "Still teaching lessons, aren't you?" Ilara's eyes glimmered, only to the ones who listen. As Cass followed her into the conference room, she realized what made Ilara Voss different wasn't power. It was control. She didn't crave the spotlight. She owned the room even when it was dark. When the meeting began, Ilara spoke only once, summarizing an entire fiscal cycle in 3 sentences. Her words were clean, final, unchallengeable. Cass scribbled one note in her pad. Power is not volume. It's precision. Outside, the city's traffic hummed like a metronome, steady and indifferent. And inside that tower of glass, history recalibrated itself once more, quietly, decisively, permanently. The boardroom emptied slowly, its walls still resonating with the weight of Ilara's last words. Cass remained seated, notebook in hand, pretending to jot notes, but really just absorbing the rhythm of what she had witnessed. It wasn't business, it was orchestration. Every silence between Ilara's sentences carried meaning. Every glance, a decision. When the final director left, Rebecca lingered by the doorway, checking her tablet. "That's the last of them," she said. "You just restructured 3 companies without raising your voice." Ilara exhaled quietly. "That's the point. Noise confuses authority," Rebecca smiled faintly. "You make it sound easy." Ilara turned toward the vast window. the city's late afternoon light painting her in gold and glass. "It's not easy," she said. "It's exact." Cass stood, closing her notebook. "When people talk about you," she began, "they use words like fearless, calculating, uncompromising. But sitting here, it doesn't feel like that. It feels deliberate." Ilara nodded. "Those aren't opposites." Cass tilted her head. "You know what they'll say, though? That you became the same thing you destroyed." Ilara looked at her, expression unreadable. "Then they've already forgotten what I destroyed." Cass met her gaze. "You dismantled arrogance." Ilara's voice softened. "No! I dismantled permission." Rebecca looked up from her tablet. "Permission for what?" "For cruelty disguised as decorum," Ilara said. "For the comfort of power, without the cost of empathy." Cass wrote the line down before she even realized it. She'd interviewed dozens of leaders, politicians, billionaires, revolutionaries. None spoke like this. None measured words as if they were currency. "Ilara," Cass said after a pause, "do you ever wish you'd just walked away that night? Ignored them?" Ilara smiled slightly, a flicker of weariness in it. "I've been walking away my entire life. That night I decided to stand still and let the world move instead." Rebecca leaned against the wall. "And it did. Not enough," Ilara said. "It never moves enough." Cass frowned. "What do you mean?" Ilara's eyes drifted toward the skyline again. "They've learned to behave, not to believe. That's the difference between shame and change." Cass scribbled again, shame versus change. Then she asked quietly, "So what's next? You keep building? Keep auditing the system?" Ilara's response was calm, almost tender. "No, I start teaching the ones who'll replace me." Rebecca blinked. "You're serious?" "Completely," Ilara said. "Power that doesn't pass on becomes possession. And possession rots." Cass stared at her, realizing she was watching a transition happen. Not a fall, not a retreat, but an evolution. Rebecca closed her tablet. "I suppose this is where you disappear again." Ilara smiled faintly. "No, this time I want to be seen leaving." That evening she did exactly that. No press release, no speech. Just a quiet walk through the front doors of Voss Global as employees looked up from their screens, startled to see her moving through the lobby like an echo becoming real. Cass followed at a distance, recording the moment not for publication but for memory. Outside, the sky was bleeding into dusk, amber fading into blue. Ilara paused on the marble steps, looking out at the city she had reshaped. Rebecca joined her. "They'll speculate for months," she said softly. "Let them," Ilara replied. "Mystery holds attention longer than certainty." Cass couldn't help but smile at that. "You're still teaching." Ilara turned toward her. "And you're still watching." Cass hesitated, then asked the one question she hadn't dared before. "Why did you really cancel the deal, Ilara?" "Beyond justice, beyond pride." Ilara's eyes narrowed, her answer slow, careful. Because for one moment, they needed to understand that belonging isn't granted, it's claimed. And once it's claimed, no one can take it back. Cass's throat tightened. "That's the real story." "No," Ilara said. "That's the real correction." A car waited at the curb, a sleek, unmarked sedan. Ilara opened the door but didn't step in yet. "Cass," she said, "write it however you need. Just remember that power isn't about winning. It's about refusing to kneel where you stood." Cass nodded, committing the words to memory. "And if the world twists your story," Ilara smiled, "then let them. My silence will explain the rest." She entered the car. The door closed softly. No fanfare, no flash, no applause, just the hum of an engine fading into the city's pulse. Rebecca watched her go, then turned to Cass. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Cass slipped her notebook into her bag. She never left. She just moved higher than the noise. The car disappeared into traffic, headlights dissolving into the golden blur of evening. The city resumed its rhythm, unaware that somewhere in its veins, a new balance had already begun. Cass looked up at the darkening skyline and whispered to herself, "Some people build towers. She built gravity." And in that moment, the silence felt infinite, like the pause between what was and what would be next. The city changed before it realized it had. Months passed. The headlines quieted. The outrage faded into myth. And what remained, what truly endured, was the aftertaste of equilibrium. Every deal now carried her shadow. Every boardroom silence was measured against that one night in the ballroom when a single voice had chosen not to rise, and the world had still heard her. Ilara Voss had vanished, at least officially. No public sightings, no new company filings. Voss Global ran itself now, guided by the system she'd left behind. The algorithm of fairness she'd coded into its structure worked like an unseen conscience. If you violated ethics, the system froze your privileges before the scandal could. The world called it the Voss effect. But somewhere far from the skyline she once ruled, on the edge of a quiet coastal town, Ilara walked along the cliffs at dawn. No heels, no armor. Just wind, and for the first time she wasn't watching the horizon for threats, she was watching it for color. Rebecca Thorne found her there, coat drawn against the breeze. She'd aged slightly, less assistant now, more equal. "The world's still talking about you," she said, smiling. "They call it a movement." Ilara didn't stop walking. "Movements fade. Structures last," Rebecca caught up. "And yet you left yours." "I didn't leave," Ilara said softly. "I gave it room to breathe." They stood together at the cliff's edge, the ocean below rising and falling like the heartbeat of something older than ambition. "Do you miss it?" Rebecca asked. "The noise?" Ilara smiled faintly. "Sometimes. Silence can feel heavier when it's earned." Rebecca handed her a small envelope. No logos, no signatures, just weight. "It's from Miranda." Ilara turned it over once before opening it. Inside was a single page written in clean, deliberate script. "We finally understand. The rooms we thought we owned were borrowed. Thank you for collecting the rent." Ilara read it twice, then folded it neatly. "She learned," she murmured. Rebecca's tone softened. "You both did." They started walking again, following a narrow path that wound down toward the shoreline. Gulls wheeled overhead. The world felt simple again, which made Ilara uneasy. Simplicity was never permanent. Cass reached out, Rebecca said. "She's doing a documentary. Wants your blessing." Ilara laughed under her breath. "My blessing or my quote?" "Both." "Tell her the story belongs to the silence now," Ilara said. "Let her fill it with her own words." Rebecca hesitated. "You know she'll romanticize you." "She'll try," Ilara said. But truth resists glamour. They stopped where the surf lapped against the rocks. The wind carried the scent of salt and distance. Rebecca turned to her. "When you look back, Ilara, do you ever wish you'd done it differently?" Ilara's eyes were steady. "No. If I had spoken louder, they'd have listened less." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Then maybe the silence was never power. Maybe it was patience." Ilara smiled. "Patience is power, Rebecca. The loud forget that." Back in the city, Cass Mercer sat in her editing room surrounded by clips, ballroom footage, interviews, still frames of Ilara's face under the chandelier. Each piece was a fragment of a legend that refused to end neatly. She adjusted the microphone on her desk, recording the final narration. Her voice was calm, reflective. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She simply existed, unapologetically, unmovable, and in that stillness, everything rearranged itself. Maybe power isn't the noise we make when we arrive. Maybe it's the quiet we leave behind when we're gone. She paused, letting the silence breathe through the room before adding, "Because somewhere, someone will hear it and remember what it felt like to stand without permission." She stopped recording and leaned back. The monitor screen glowed faintly with the words, "Final Cut. The Quiet Architect." Outside the studio, rain began to fall, a soft, cleansing rhythm that felt more like renewal than repetition. At that same hour, Ilara sat by her window, watching the storm roll in from the sea. She thought of the ballroom, of the faces that had doubted her, of Miranda Vale's trembling voice, of Cass's camera, of the young girl at the orphanage who had called her thunder behind glass. For the first time, she whispered the truth to herself. "I never wanted to win. I just wanted to be seen." Rebecca across the room heard her. You were? Ilara nodded once. Then it was enough. Outside the lightning flared. White, brief, absolute. And when the thunder came, it didn't sound like fury anymore. It sounded like recognition. The camera of time pulled back over the ocean, over the cliffs, over the city that had learned her name like a prayer whispered in boardrooms and classrooms alike. The voiceover, Cass's voice, played over the fading image. Some storms end with destruction. Others end with design. Hers ended with both, and a new beginning, fade to black.